How's it going? I'm IlaGolden and welcome to my vlog. Okay, alright, so this one we are going to be talking about the Unrealm, which I believe I've sort of mentioned kind of a few times when discussing some of my earlier vlog topics, but I haven't actually gone into any real sort of detail as to who and what the Unrealm are or how I've sort of utilised them over the years. I have, like, at various times utilised them either quite a lot. For example, in the YF the fanfic series. So for once, not talking about the tales. There are quite a few Unrealm characters that feature quite heavily within that series of stories. So that's been one way I've sort of utilised the characters, and I've attempted various other projects where I sort of either had the Unrealms as sort of the focus or as sort of an element within the story. So what are the Unrealm? Okay, so I think one of the ones I sort of mentioned them in was the whole classification system and the idea of what it means to be human within the multiverse. So you're talking about being human is a classification, which basically means you have to have the full human element. So it's more akin to being humanoid rather than from Earth. Just as a quick recap for those of you who haven't seen that one, otherwise go see that one. I go into sort of more details about it. So to be sort of classed as human and real, you have to have the four human elements in some form. The four human elements are mind, heart, body, and soul. You also have to experience some sort of birth, or some sort of point where your life has come into existence through at least semi-natural means. You have to be subject to the ability to grow up and to age in some sort of format, whether it's through the sort of standard aging or circular aging, it doesn't matter too much. There has to be some sort of aging capability within your existence, and you have to be capable of some sort of death, or capable of dying. The Unrealm are the Unrealm basically because they fall outside of these human qualities, these human requirements. So they come into existence rather than experience some sort of birth, which is the more debatable point with the Unrealm, certainly with some of the more synthetically created breeds, like first generation tribrids, and experimented created beings, but then arguably they've started from some sort of fetus like creature at some point and have had that sort of progression, whereas the Unrealms come into existence already fully formed. And that's sort of like the main key. They don't really have an aging process. They don't have any kind of like maturing process. They literally come into existence. They're already their fully formed self. Not that they're not capable of learning and growing as a person, just that they come in and they've emerged and they are the age that they will be throughout their entire existence. They won't, do all that normal aging stuff that is sort of required within the human classification. They also don't die. They usually reach a point where their existence will end, but it's not a death as such. They don't sort of leave behind any remains. They don't rejoin the light, which again is something sort of within the human classification, because they've not started from the light. they sort of are the exception to the rule that everything begins and ends with light, which I guess you could say that they do begin and end with light in the same way that, everything around us would, but not in the same way that your normal human would begin and end with life. They've not started their existence from the light. They've started their existence from something that somebody has done. So they don't have the recognized state of death. They certainly don't have an afterlife. They just literally just stop existing. They start existing and then they stop existing. That is their sort of cycle, and in between that, they can't be killed. Their healing ability, if you want to call it that, usually is pretty remarkable, and there's very little that can sort of damage them permanently. They can exist in some pretty, pretty half-formed, quarter-formed, barely there sort of states, because they are just an existence. They are not a life in the way that life is sort of recognized within the multiverse. That's the sort of, they come into existence fully formed, and then they leave existence, and they're not born and they don't die, which is one of the sort of main ways that people kind of go, yeah, that's how you're identifying Unrealm. It's also debatable whether or not they have the four human elements. They definitely have a mind. They definitely have a body. The two that tend to get argued with them is whether they have the heart and the soul element, because those are the bits that people associate as being what returns to the light and what is born from the light, when normal or more natural forms of life are created. So the argument there is sort of, well, do they have these two elements? And some people sort of like say, well, of course they do. They can form emotional connections with people. There is a strong evidence that they must have these in some form, and as long as they have them in some form, they take the class as human. But others would sort of argue that no, they haven't started from the light, which is what we have decided is where those two elements are created. And if you haven't begun there, how can you then have those elements? So yeah, there's sort of a great sort of debate. But that's why most people stick with they don't get born and they don't die argument, rather than debating the human elements with them. Although both are sort of debated within the multiverse itself. So unknown characters can be quite fun, because they exist in this completely different way to most other characters, and they exist for many different reasons. They are, in a sense, artificial life forms, in a very, very true sense, artificial life forms, because there's nothing about them which should exist and would not exist if it wasn't for the interference of somebody or something else. Gaia, something else that I mentioned in one of my early ones, the Gaians in particular have created themselves a lot of Unrealms, because they can. And it's one of those things they sort of have created to a point to sort of protect their own existence, so that anybody living on Gaia who isn't, strictly from Gaia, so you're dead, as it were, the dead people living on Gaia. Again, you may want to sort of check the various early blogs for what's going on there a little bit. They don't necessarily interact with the actual Gaians very much, but they do interact quite a bit with the Unrealm that the Gaians have created, and the Gaians have kind of created them for that purpose, so that they can live underground, in their nice sort of very light-filled underground realm on Gaia, whilst their representatives are making sure that people give them a decent amount of respect, because they are god-class beings after all. And because of that, the Unrealm do sort of worship them a little bit, which does sort of elevate them to a god. Again, watch the vlog on gods to understand that bit fully. But again, there's an argument because these are sort of artificial beings. You know, does that count? And the reason that they sort of created unrealms rather than actually creating a normal life is because unrealms don't have a set life expectancy, and they often don't have the ability to procreate. So if you're trying to control a population that you want to represent you, then the easiest way is to sort of create the unrealms. And then if one particular unrealm is doing something that you don't particularly like them doing, you can get rid of them, and there is a lot less consequence to that because of the whole debate that goes on around the unrealms. And I'm not saying it's fair. I quite like the unrealm. But it does sort of pose a lot of greyness into how they're treated. And there has been a particular story that I've sort of tried telling on and off throughout the years, and I never get very far with it, which does sort of focus on a more mortal world created series of unrealms, and you know how a catastrophe has kind of taken them and turned them from tools that the humans were using into kind of the humans' enemy because they've survived this catastrophe relatively unscathed, whereas the mortals, the humans, have kind of come out of it in a dystopia has sort of formed, and they sort of blame the unrealms, even though it wasn't the unrealms who created this, it was them. But it's easier to blame the thing that isn't like you than to blame your history than to blame your own ancestors and to blame the people who've actually done it because you may be some way related to those people. So yeah, I quite like that series, and I do quite like the characters in it, and they are quite sweet. And you get, because although the Unrealm don't age like everyone else does, they do have the capacity to learn. They've also got the capacity to get damaged and corrupted. Certainly, if they are, yes, they can heal, but the more you break them apart and destroy them, the less cohesion they sort of have, and the more time they're sort of around, they sort of not become corrupted. Well, not corrupted in the sense of becoming evil, but corrupted in the sense of degraded. Like they, imagine their brain as sort of like a floppy disk or a CD, that kind of corruption, that kind of information. There's a corruption of information within essentially their programming, but that makes them sound like robots, and they're not. They are made of flesh. It is confusing. It is very confusing dealing with the Unrealm. Maybe that's why I've put this one off for so long, because the Unrealm is a massive topic, and it's probably why they've been mentioned in various vlogs before, because they do sort of cross over into lots of various different things. It's quite fun going, yeah, you should go watch that one, and you should go watch that one, because you'll get a better idea of what's going on. But you guys should be watching all my vlogs anyways. Come on now. So, yeah. I don't know how clearly I've managed to get any of that across. There's a lot of information to try to focus on, because it is such a massive topic, even though I've only sort of done like bits and pieces with it so far. As I said, Life of Fanfic has a good use of the Unrealm. Unfortunately, there's no way you can read that at the moment, even though it has been up online in the past. And likewise, the story that I keep sort of trying to write and never quite finishing would also be quite a good one, as sort of a contrast. So at some point, I'll probably go back and finish that one. Maybe my next project. Maybe. We'll see. Okay, so the topic for the next one is going to be animals. I think I have in part chosen this topic because, as some of you know, I do now own a cute little pair of Jabbers. So yeah, I'm not sure if the focus is necessarily going to be on pets, but it's certainly going to be on how I deal with animals within the multiverse. Might be interesting. Might be a lot of me talking about the Jabbers. We'll see how I feel when I come to record it. Let's leave it at that. Alright, so I hope you found this one sort of interesting. I know it's not necessarily been the easiest one to follow necessarily, and there's been a lot of referring back to earlier vlogs, so we'll see how that goes. Alright, so as I said, I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I will see you next time. See ya! If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to check out some of my others, and if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. See ya!